So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us again today. It's been a while. So we're back for another brown bag lunch webinar, this time over Conservation Reserve Program or CRP. My name is Diego with Farm Veteran Coalition. I'm joined here today with Kay Bowen, our program coordinator, and Drew Walters, our USDA FSA rep for today's webinar. Again, we hope you had a great Thanksgiving and we're excited to get started again today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll ask them as we go or towards the end as well. And yeah, Drew, you have anything to say before we get started?
Nothing specific other than hello, everyone, and excited to be here today and share with you about the Conservation Reserve Program.
All right, thank you. Kate, take it away.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. It's fun to see some people from Tennessee and also some of the farmers that we've worked with during this technical assistance program. So Farmer Veteran Coalition started working on this project. We have a cooperative agreement with a bunch of other nonprofits like Latino Farmers and Ranchers, Farmers Outreach Solutions, Flower Hill Institute, and we're collaboratively providing technical assistance. Originally, it was for the Emergency Relief Program, so that was ERP2, which is all finished up right now. And so since the closing of that program, we've been doing FSA outreach. So we've been training our team about different programs so that we can help our FVC members learn about these different programs and take advantage of them. So we're going to be covering a lot of bases today. Feel free to put any questions in the chat, or you can join us for our office hours later on today. So our session right now is being recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel, which is the Farmer Veteran Coalition has all of our webinars and some of our videos from past conferences on our YouTube channel. So there's a ton of different resources there. Also programs like our apprenticeship programs, like Dairy Grazers Apprenticeship and Archie's Institute. There's a lot of information there, so check that out. And we do provide at the Farmer Veteran Coalition technical assistance in a host of different languages. We're up to 20 with our language line service. So if English isn't your first language or preferred language, we can provide service with that. So you just call our 800 number and request. We'll look up you with translate and we do that way. So the Farmer Veteran Coalition was started by Michael O'Gorman, and he saw a need for a new generation of farmers and also for employment for service members returning from active duty. And so our mission is mobilizing veterans to feed America. Our membership program is free to join. You can do that at our website. And there's a host of different programming and things that we offer. In many different states across America, we have state chapters, and those provide fellowship and connection with neighborhood, local, and statewide farmers and ranchers. And then we also provide a nationwide network of connection. So if you want to get into growing elderberries and you feel like you need to do a farm tour of someone in your area and you'd prefer to visit a veteran farmer, you can just give our member services a call and we can look up in our database. We have over 30,000 members and we can connect you with that. One of our most popular programs is our fellowship fund, which is coming up soon. So watch your email box and make sure we have your current email address on file. That's a program that is really incredible, and it can be something on the smaller end, like a $500 gift card from Tractor Supply, or it could be a Kubota tractor. And we're always looking to grow that program. So for Giving Tuesday, a lot of our donations go into that fellowship fund. And that's just a really amazing program because sometimes, you just can't expand your business because of finances, and, getting hog panels or a new pasture poultry setup can be pretty life-changing for a business. So that's a really great program that we offer. We just had our annual conference in DC, and we also have our apprenticeship programs, and there is a new apprenticeship program webpage on our website if you're interested in learning about those. This picture here is of Jeanette Lombardo, so she's our executive director, and you can contact her at that number at the top, FVC Farm. So today, while we've been doing these monthly brown bag lunch webinars, we've been collaborating with Flower Hill Institute. And so after we sort of give this more formal presentation, there are office hours afterwards, and that's a really great time to connect with different FSA specialists. Informally, it's not recorded. You can go into more detail about your situation on your farm, or things that are holding you back, or things you want assistance with. And so I invite you to do that. So we have that later on this afternoon. And if you're watching this and like some extra help, we always have our technical assistance that is available to you, members and non-members alike. So I'm going to be hosting this with Drew, and I'm excited to get to him and him share a little bit about FSA. So Drew, what brought you to work with FSA? What was kind of one of your biggest pulls for working with farmers and ranchers?
That's a great question, Kate. To be honest with you, I never pictured myself behind a desk or working for the government. My background was actually started in Montana working on ranches, and then did a little farming in Missouri. I am from Missouri originally. Friend of a friend turned me on to the Farm Service Agency, and I haven't looked back. It's been a great opportunity. We really put, services in our name, so that's something we really pride ourselves on. And it's a great agency, and we do wonderful things. Good to be a part of.
Awesome. And what office are you based out of in Missouri?
Currently, I am in the Missouri State Office, which is here in Columbia, Missouri. Previously, I've been a county executive director in some more rural areas in the state, Callaway County and Sullivan County.
Awesome. So with this program, I just wanted to give you a quick background. So sometimes when I'm learning about these programs, knowing the history of them kind of helps me make some sense of them. So the USDA, this is sort of their genealogy family tree, and how they work. So there's a lot of moving pieces with the USDA. But with this program at the bottom, you can see where the arrows are. It's administered by the Farm Service Agency, but there is also assistance from NRCS. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, Drew? Sort of how that works between FSA and NRCS?
Absolutely. This program really illustrates the cooperative agreement between two agencies within USDA accomplishing a common goal. FSA is in charge of implementing the program, and NRCS really supports us by creating all our conservation plans. They're the ones with the technical background that really helps participants with decisions on what covers the plan and what are the best solutions for the scenarios on their farming operations.
And a lot of the FSA offices are also in the same building as NRCS, right? In a lot of counties.
I can speak for Missouri. In Missouri, yes, we are in the same offices. I do believe there are some states where that is not the case. So coordinating those conversations might be a little bit more difficult in some areas.
All right. So in a nutshell, can you tell us a few sentences summing up what CRP is?
Sure. I mean, basically, in exchange for an annual rental payment, CRP is going to take ground out of production, and we are going to plant covers that help with both erosion and wildlife habitat. There are a lot of different program options, and hopefully we'll be able to cover some of those later in the presentation.
So when I was looking for someone to help host this, I was looking for someone from one of the top 5 CRP states. So these are the states that just have the most land enrolled in it. And so you come in the top 5, Drew, which is great. So what do you generally see when someone is coming in? They already have a farm number, they've worked with FSA before, but they're interested in CRP. Do you have kind of what is sort of this, not stereotypical, but what do you commonly see as questions that come in when people are just starting to become familiar with the program?
Absolutely. A lot of times it's people interested in creating some wildlife habitat on their farm. And there's a lot of different options that we can offer through CRP, whether it be kind of small acre situations, or if there's also through general CRP, we can look at enrolling entire farms as long as eligibility and requirements are met. So I would say wildlife establishment is a large common need. Another is just conservation concerns, soil erosion control.
Great, thank you. And then could you talk a little bit about the different types of CRP? So it's not just one thing. There's the grassland CRP and the continuous CRP. And could you just kind of go over a couple of the major differences in those programs?
Sure. I can touch on grassland CRP a little bit. We don't have as much of that in Missouri, but grassland CRP is kind of our working lands CRP. So unlike the other continuous and general CRP, with grasslands, you're still allowed to hay those acres and graze those acres. There's usually just more specific grazing and haying requirements that have to be met. Those rental rates, at least in Missouri, tend to be a little bit lower than your compensation would be through continuous and general. For continuous and general, since we're taking ground out of production, those rental rates tend to be a little higher. And if we're going to talk about differences between continuous and general, the way I like to explain the difference is continuous practices tend to be a little more resource specific or resource concern specific, such as a waterway or a filter strip along a stream where we're filtering runoff before water goes into a stream, versus general, where again, general can be an entire field or an entire farm that we enroll in CRP.
And so, as you touched on, the biggest sort of factors that people are trying to help would be the runoff, erosion, the field edges, and the oddly shaped fields. So could you explain a little bit about the oddly shaped fields and the field edges, and how, with precision ag and larger equipment, some land becomes sort of not ideal to farm? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, this is a great point. I've seen a lot of this over the years as equipment gets larger, these smaller pieces that tend to get, and I know deer pressure is a big issue in Missouri. So if you've got a small acres that just is not producing, sometimes we can enroll that in CRP, and it's a way for folks to still get income off of those acres. Oddly shaped fields, if there's a tight area in the trees that large piece of equipment can't get in anymore, I mean, we can enroll areas that are not farmable because of that large equipment into CRP, as long as those other eligibility requirements are met.
And is there a minimum amount of land that you need to enroll? So like if you had, if it was only a 5-acre section of field you wanted to exclude, could you have that be on your application?
That's a good question. It kind of depends on what practice we're talking about. So some practices do have minimum sizes, others do not. As something 5 acres, I believe you're going to have a lot of options in different practices to enroll that in.
And then, as we saw earlier, the average general contract length is usually 10 to 15 years. Are there any ways to get out of the contract, or are there ever any changes due to global issues that change how how farmers can get out of contracts?
That is a good question. Generally, when we go into a 10-year contract or 15-year contract, it is a requirement to stay in the contract for that length of period. If we have to terminate those contracts before that time, in a lot of situations, we'll be asking for refunds of all the payments that have been received up to that point. So it is generally a commitment, 10-year commitment, that is expected to be kept.
So when farmers are considering this program, part of the work that they need to do on their end to see if it's a good fit is to figure out, how profitable every part of your farm is, which is easier and easier to do with precision ag technology. But this quote I thought was really important. 20% of the farm loses money, 20% of the farm breaks even, 60% of the farm turns the total profit. So if there is a section of your farm that isn't providing income, at least regularly, because maybe it often floods or it is prone to erosion, that might be acreage that you'd want to consider for this program. So a little bit of the backstory of this, it's a little bit of sort of a flip-flopping of intervention and how that impacts the farmer. So it's the deep plowing of the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, and then some areas experienced drought conditions for over 8 years. So the US government provided technical assistance for repairing the soil, and then we also got a lot of rain across the nation. So production then went from the Dust Bowl of it being low to returning, and then surplus of commodities driving the prices lower and lower. So then the government started the soil bank program, which is sort of something from our grandparents' generation of the 50s and 60s. And that was when farmers were actually paid to idle land, which is, similar to CRP. But then even with land idled, new technology, bigger tractors, the surplus returned. And then as the Soviet Union and some other countries overseas needed more grains, farmers really wanted to expand their international export market. And then people just started farming the fence row to fence row. And so that combined with more pesticides, better seeds, the output intensively increased. And so that also is a piece of CRP as well, the environmental piece, but also supply. And then CRP, sort of as we know it or as we'd recognize it, was in the Farm Bill and signed by Reagan in '85. So it has changed, though, quite a bit. And every Farm Bill CRP programs like it change a little bit. Do you want to go over, Drew, any changes you've seen since your time at FSA with CRP? If there's anything you've noticed that you'd like to.
Yeah, it seems like these days the only thing constant is change, right? You guys have highlighted some really good changes right here on your slide, and I would say these climate smart practice incentives are a big part of something that is changed in CRP. Is they are really trying to promote the program and adding some additional financial incentives to participate. A lot of that have to do with rental rates. These incentives have increased rental rates, and another part of it is this increased practice incentives. Some continuous practices, you'll end up with a very good cost share on establishing this practice. So yeah, these are some of the biggest changes in CRP recently.
And then you touched on this before, the difference between grassland CRP, continuous CRP. And could you go over a little bit of the CREP program and what that looks like?
Oh, I'm sorry. You've hit on a subject that I have no knowledge of. Unfortunately, we do not have any CREP in Missouri, so I can claim ignorance on that.
Oh, good, good. Well, then could you explain a little bit how the process works? So if general enrollment's open, do you want to touch on a little bit of the dates, like times of year for that kind of thing, and then how that works with EBI?
Yes. Okay. And I didn't touch on this so much earlier, but when it comes time, when you're interested in enrolling in CRP, another big difference between continuous CRP and general CRP is that continuous CRP is an ongoing enrollment period, meaning you can make an offer and you can start a practice at any point in the year. With general CRP, there is a designated sign-up period, and those will be announced publicly, and there's not currently any signups going on right now. But with general CRP, the process is that we are going to rank your offer based on the environmental benefits index. So basically, we look at a lot of different factors on your CRP offer, and we're going to assign a value. Good. And then we're going to measure your offer against all the other offers in the country. And we're going to decide, national office is going to decide the minimum points needed to have an accepted offer. So it is a competitive process. So you're not guaranteed to get in on your general offer, but I believe your local FSA office staff is going to be able to help you if general CRP is something you're very serious about getting in. They should be able to help you make the best offer to have a good chance of being accepted.
Awesome. So I skipped ahead to this. So this is the EBI factors to just kind of break it down a little bit. So these are all things that would go to your score. You scan a code, it'll bring you up to the FSA USDA fact sheet on this. But it goes into detail, sort of how they're going to be looking at your forms and what you really want to be able to touch on as many things as you can, so you score as many points as possible on it. And then could you just touch on a little bit more about the continuous versus general? I know you have a little bit, but it's really important so people know when they go into their office which one they might want to be asking about.
Absolutely. And I would always recommend folks, when you visit your local office, if you just start with a general idea of what you would like to have on your farm, they should be able to steer you towards whether general CRP or continuous CRP would fit your needs the best. Again, the biggest difference is continuous is not a competitive bid. You're automatically accepted. Contracts can be 10 to 15 years, and there's an ongoing sign up. And with general, it's a competitive bid process. There is a designated sign up throughout the year. And after you submit your offer is going to be ranked to determine which is going to be accepted. And those typically are only 10-year contracts.
And your offer per acre would be higher in generally speaking, right, than the continuous, or does it just depend on your situation?
It can depend on your situation, but typically your continuous is actually going to be a little bit higher. They pay a little higher percentage on the county average rental rate.
Great, thank you. All right, can you touch on who's eligible for this program?
Eligibility, typically we're looking at, for the most part, we're looking at landowners with the CRP program. In most situations, you need to have owned that land for 12 months before you can make an offer, but there are some exceptions to that rule.
And then can you touch on, this is the important piece of how many people can be included in this?
Yeah, so again, a lot of people, when they own their property, the property is in a trust, or maybe an LLC actually owns the property. A lot of those different types of entities are all eligible to participate in CRP. It gets a little bit more complicated with government entities and such of that. And I have pretty limited knowledge of that thing, but for the most part, we deal with individuals and all types of different farming operations. So again, you've got to own the land for 12 months before the end of these signups or before you submit an offer. Or again, there are some exceptions like listed here on the screen. If you acquired the land by will or succession, or other circumstances that DAFB can approve. I will say those situations tend to be few and far between. Again, don't have any experience submitting things to the administrator to ask him to approve.
And then there's the operator eligibility requirements. That's a little bit different than a landowner requirements. Do you mind touching on these?
Yeah, so again, in order to put the operator on the contract to be part of the CRP payment, they've got to operate the land for 12 months, similar to land ownership. And then the COC also needs to see some evidence that they are going to be on the land for the life of the contract.
And so would this be someone, if you had someone haying your land or a different person other than the owner of the land doing the farming, or is this the person who's doing the implementation of things like putting in riparian buffer strips?
Oh, so typically if someone, usually that's a contract, in my experience, is usually a contractor who's installing the process. So in situations where I've seen operators on the farm, the operator has been farming that ground for a long time, and they are working with the landowner saying, hey, we have some conservation needs we need to address on this farm. And the operator is agreeing that I will manage all this in exchange for participating in the CRP contract.
And then this was some more issues that come up with the ownership requirements, that it just kind of showing that you really need to make sure that you're qualified or eligible for the program, and that some of our farmers and ranchers won't necessarily fit all of this criteria. Do you want to go over any of these specifics or anything that you've seen while you've been helping people enroll in the program?
Sure. The biggest catch we have is this 12-month ownership stipulation. So again, as long as if you've just purchased a farm and you've owned it for more than 12 months, you're not going to have any issues enrolling in CRP. And if you've owned it for less than that, sometimes there are some exceptions to where we can still initiate some CRP practices on your farm. It's hard to go into detail on all those different exceptions, but it's something worth looking into. So I would just highlight, just because you haven't owned it for 12 months, there are still some exceptions that we can work with.
Great.
And then real quick, I want to jump in while we're on ownership. Drew, so there's a question. What happens if property is sold during the contract duration? Does the new owner assume the agreement?
So that is something we really try to highlight during the enrollment process. That is something that they would need to stipulate in their sales agreement, because if the new owner does not continue that contract, then the original person, and they terminate that contract, then that original person is going to have to refund those payments that they received because the contract did not go to full term.
Okay.
Good question.
Oh, and then, so this one, unfortunately, not many of us are in this boat, but you cannot make over $900,000 to be eligible to receive payments and benefits. Do you want to go over this a little bit, Drew?
I mean, that is pretty much it. That's a lot of FSA's programs have this same requirement, and CRP is no exception.
Great. And then could you touch on the cropping history requirement that people would need when they go into FSA, what they need to, what the land needs to be eligible for this program?
Yeah, so this is usually one of the tougher criteria to meet with CRP. For cropping history, basically what we're looking for is 4 of the 6 years of the eligible cropping period need to be planted or considered planted in order to be eligible. But for last year's sign up with the previous Farm Bill, those years were 2012 to 2017. So for that time frame, you had to have a crop planted 4 out of those 6 years in order for that area to be eligible to be enrolled into CRP.
Great, thank you. And then touch on the ineligible acreage, please.
Ineligible acreage, a lot of time, and again, most of the things we run into are not having the correct cropping history. Also, if it is federally owned or there are any federal restrictions or easements on it, any acres enrolled in another federal program that establishes a conservation cover. So sometimes we run in, NRCS has their CSP or EQIP programs. If they have already established a cover and it's still under maintenance agreement from NRCS, then unfortunately we cannot enroll it into CRP. Existing grass waterways, this we get into a little bit of our needed and feasible, which I don't know if I've addressed yet with continuous CRP. With continuous CRP, when you make an offer, there's a site visit done to make sure that the practice is needed. So for example, if you already built a waterway on your farm and then you wanted to enroll that into CRP, when we do the field visit and we find a existing grass waterway, or that's not going to be eligible because the purpose is already being served. Any land where the producer is required by law to perform a practice or faces enforcement action. We don't have much of this in Missouri, but I believe there could be some laws somewhere requiring a filter strip somewhere along a water body. If that was the case, that area would not be enrolled in CRP. And of course, any land already enrolled in CRP can't have additional CRP.
Great, thanks. And then, so how does submitting an offer happen? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but could you go over a little bit on the sort of important criteria and how that works?
Sure. This slide really illustrates the process well. And submitting an offer really starts with your local office, visiting the local office and talking about what practices you're going to be interested in. They're going to check the eligibility for you to make sure you meet all the requirements, including the cropping history like we discussed. For some practices, there's going to be a site visit completed to make sure the practice is needed, and then comes the paperwork, right? Submitting an offer on a form requires quite a bit of paperwork, but our staff are all capable of making that process friendly for everybody.
And so unlike ERP2, where farmers had to do the load of their paperwork themselves, the burden of the paperwork for just about every other FSA program, you guys will help out with the paperwork.
Absolutely.
All right, and then could you go over a little bit about the payments and how that works?
Absolutely. Let's see. So payments, there are 2 types of payments typically with CRP. You've got your cost share, which is helping pay to establish the practice that you're installing. And then you also have your annual rental payment. So annual rental payments are going to be unique to each farm and each offer because they use soils data from the area that's being offered into CRP, and there are values assigned to each soil in the county. So for general CRP, you're going to receive 85% of that average rental rate, and for continuous CRP, you're going to get 90% of that average rental rate. All of these calculations and all of these rates are determined, so you will see them as part of your offer. So it's all something that you know before you're going into the contract.
Great, thank you. So we've touched on something called practices a bunch here. And so could you go over a little bit of what practices, what does that mean? So if you can hold your smartphone up to your computer, you can find the CRP practices library, which is a huge resource that FSA has that kind of goes over everything from wildlife food plots. So if you're interested in, increasing your pheasant or rabbit population, to riparian buffers, different types of erosion control. When you're speaking about practices, what do you mean?
Practices are going to be very unique to the area of the country that you're in, right? And that makes perfect sense because the grasses that grow in Missouri are not going to do so well in Utah. So again, we're going to try to align a practice with what the customer wants. If their primary objective is wildlife habitat, then we are going to search for a different practice that has a species composition that would align with their interests.
So this is the piece that you probably work really closely with NRCS with, or other wildlife biologists. If wildlife or pollinators was the thing that you wanted to do on your farm, as opposed to erosion control and keeping pesticides or herbicides out of a waterway.
NRCS is going to be a great resource. They're going to outline what species are going to be in the mixes for the different practices, and they are going to develop a plan to help you establish those practices effectively.
Great. So if we go to this library and just pull up one of them, the establishment of permanent introduced grasses and legumes would be, one of the things. So this would be one of the features, I guess you'd call it, that you would add to your application if that was what you were going to focus on. And can you focus on many of these practices, not just pick one?
I'm sorry, Kate, you broke up a little there at the end of your question.
Oh, sorry. Could you have on your application that you are going to work on more than just one practice?
Absolutely. You can choose multiple practices per contract.
So you could go through that library, check out what might be most applicable to your situation. And then it would kind of it all goes to your scoring, to weighting your application, right?
Yes. Earlier, especially this screen you have up, you have a 40-point mix and a 10-point mix. And earlier we talked about that EBI, the Environmental Benefit Index. So one of those factors is this is where you can affect or help your EBI score when you're making a general offer. Different mixes score differently on the EBI score. So if you'll notice the difference between a 40-point mix and a 10-point mix, your 40-point mix has a lot more diversity to it. So it's going to score higher on the EBI scale.
And then could you touch on cover management?
Yeah. Another requirement of CRP for several practices is to complete management. Depending on your state, that can look a little different, but in Missouri, we typically have 3 options. Or we're going to look at a controlled burn, we're going to do some light disking, or a herbicide application. And the idea of management is to encourage diversity in our stands. Like, we're going to help a lot of our practices suppress the grasses and help encourage some additional forbs and legumes to establish in the acreage.
And so this is just going into a little detail about the CP8A. So it would be the grass waterway. So that's the piece we spoke about before. And so this is a fact sheet that you can find in that resource library, and it can go over specifically some of the financial benefits for each of the different practices. Is there anything you want to touch on with this, Drew?
Fact sheets are a great resource. Again, with CRP is very state and area specific. So I would really encourage, if you are looking for information on CRP, to really reach out to your local offices, because they're going to give you good information on the practices and how that's going to work in your area.
And so this is the next page of that fact sheet. And it goes into details, the eligible land, the owner operator eligibility, and the benefits of it as well. So that resource library is really helpful as you're going through and just trying to do some research on different types of sustainable farming practices. So could you just go through the steps if we're interested in getting involved in this? You mentioned going to our local office, but what would that look like if we walk through your doors today and we don't even have a farm number that we know of for our property?
Been through this process a few times. It is not that bad, but coming in with a deed to your property is a good place to start. And we can help you complete your eligibility paperwork and get your farm number. And then we can start discussing what programs you would be interested in. Again, we have service in our name, so we're always excited to see new customers in our offices and explain our programs to them.
So we have a bunch of questions that have come in. Let's just quickly look at those. There was one about the size of lots. So we spoke about that, that it just kind of depends on your area and what type of CRP program you're going to be involved in. There was another one about are easements disqualifying?
Easements are not disqualifying. We would need to see the easement. I shouldn't have spoke probably so generally about easements on that. But so to answer your question, no,
Maybe.
if there is an easement, that doesn't necessarily mean it's ineligible.
Okay. And then someone, Calvin wrote, maybe I'm confused, but the land needs to be cropped if you've had it longer than a year. Does that just mean it's just you'd have a crop record? You need to have that history piece for FSA as well, right, Drew?
Yes. Yeah. So I think I understand where you're going with this question. How are you going to know if it was farmed in those previous years if you bought it after those years? There could be a record within FSA if someone participated and reported on that farm. We would have those records. There are other ways that we can get cropping history through CRP.
And then Calvin has another follow-up question. Does land erosion in the desert qualify?
Ooh, that is going to be a difficult question for this Missourian to answer. I'm going to have to
We'll have to
pass
defer
on
to
that.
their local FSA office.
Yeah.
And then there are a few other ones. I'm a new landowner. How do I price crop history? It was never previously provided to USDA.
How do you get crop history if it was never previously reported? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I think you're correct. Yes.
I'm going to have to refer to my handbook, but I believe there is a process where you can get a certification from neighbors or folks in the area who had knowledge that those acres were farmed. There can be ways. Again, working with your local office through that process would be my recommendation.
And then there was a follow-up to the easement question, and I'm guessing this would be something that you need to see someone's specific deed to actually read it to see the specifications. But it says, is the easement restriction a conservation easement or a utility easement? I'm guessing that would be really specific.
I believe the easement reference in the slide was in the event of like a wetland conservation easement. So if there's already a conservation easement in place that is has the same purpose as CRP, there can be issues there. Utility easements, for the most part, I believe, are not an issue.
Okay. And then a few more questions just to put you on the spot. Here's a potential scenario question from James. 300 acres of woodlot, looking at white oak reforestation and invasive species management for kudzu. Need to grow out oak seedlings to 5 years to facilitate survival. So if it's a woodlot, would that qualify for this since there wouldn't be crop history?
Got to have the cropping history to be eligible for CRP.
Okay. And then David's got a question. What programs would support clearing and eliminating invasive species on his property? So he's got autumn olive. So if it's been cropped, CRP might be a good option because maybe that disking or burning. Autumn olive's really hard to kill, but would there be a program other than CRP that might be helpful for invasive species management, or is CRP the best bet?
This is a scenario that I would recommend to visit with your local NRCS office. A lot of times they have programs available for things such as that CRP can't cover. I don't know. I know in Missouri we have some other conservation agencies that sometimes can help with those type of scenarios, but that's not something, unless again you have cropping history, that CRP can help with.
Geraldine asks, is hay considered a crop for this program? Like for cropping
Hay is
history?
not.
Okay.
Hay is not considered a crop. It's an annual crop, I believe. There are some scenarios where things such as alfalfa in a rotation with other annual crops can be considered acceptable for CRP.
So what are 3 of the most common crops, or a couple of the most common crops that you see? Be corn,
In
soybean.
Missouri, we have a lot of corn, soybeans, wheat.
Okay. And then we've got one more, and I believe this would be the same, checking out NRCS and maybe county forester, but someone says they bought 400 acres in Oklahoma that's been ignored for 40 years. They're currently clearing and burning the cedars. Is there a program to help with reclaiming the land?
Yeah, through CRP. Yeah, that would be my recommendation, is visit with your local NRCS office and they might be able to point you in the right direction.
And then James asked, is logging considered a cropping history?
It is not.
I wish it was, but no, it's not. And that is it. So that's all of the questions, I believe. And then if you have any additional questions, we're going to be having that office hours later today. We'll have a couple FSA specialists there. And that's a really great time. It's a interactive format, so you're able to speak at the meeting, and you're able to really share your story and your challenges, and see if there's anything we can do to help. Oh, Terry has one more. I think we did answer this though. What happens if the property is sold under the contract? Yes, we answered that one. I think that's just about it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to Diego.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Drew, for all the help, for answering all the questions. We had a lot of questions. I know it's a lot of information. If we missed your question or if we didn't answer it as best we could have, I highly suggest checking out Flower Hill's office hours later today at 3 p.m. Central. They'll go into more depth about this as well. I believe they'll also have FSA reps there. They can also help answer any questions that we might have missed, or if you have more specific questions, they could probably help you out as well. Again, this is being recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel within the next couple weeks. I'll put the link in our chat there. So be on the lookout for that. It'll be uploaded soon, hopefully. There won't be a brown bag for Equip. I believe I'm pronouncing it right. There won't be, but if you can reach out to us at support@farmecho.org, we could probably help you with information on that. Our next webinar will be on the Livestock Indemnity Program, I believe, LIP, and that'll be within the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that as well. We'll do an announcement for you to register for that. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on email, call us, or also check out the office hours later with Flower Hill. Drew, anything else you'd like to say?
Thanks for your time today, and I hope everybody has happy holidays.
Thank you, Drew. And thank you, Kate. Great job today. And again, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.